It's the Happy Families Podcast. It's the podcast for the time-poor parent who just wants answers now.
G'day and welcome. Thanks for joining us on the Happy Families Podcast. Today, I'm really excited for a special guest joining me, Rebecca Delahoy. Beck runs a Substack called Lessons Learned. Beck is a homeschool mum, 3 kids, at, well, obviously various ages, because that's how kids work. They come along at different times. I don't know why I said that. I'm a bit nervous, actually. There are very, very few people whose work I read and think, oh, everyone needs to know about this. I guess because I've got a PhD in the area, it's diminishing returns. I only get so much value from reading other people's parenting content. But when I stumbled across Rebecca's Substack, I knew that I'd found somebody who's got some insights that are fabulous. And Beck joins me right now. Hey, what are we talking about today, Beck? What's the topic for your podcast content?
Well, today I'm talking about how we want to raise good humans. That's kind of the goal of parenting, is that we want to raise our kids to be good people, but how sometimes we get out in the way of doing that.
I love it. How old are the humans that you are raising?
7, 5, and 2.5.
Okay, so 2 of them homeschooled, and obviously the baby's just hanging around everyone's knees and making noise.
Yeah, making it more difficult, but it's fun.
Yeah, fun is not the word that I would use to describe our homeschooling experience so far, but that's a podcast for another day. All right, Beck, let's hear it from your Lessons Learned Substack, Raising Good Humans.
Okay, thank you. So I actually studied psychology and neuroscience at university, and so I don't have quite as much experience as you, but I still know a fair bit about child development and about the brain and about neuroscience and all of these things. And one day I was just thinking about all of that I had learned, and I had this sort of light bulb moment about how these things that psychology is, which is the study of thoughts, feelings, and behaviour, really relates to exactly what we're trying to do as parents. So we think about thoughts, and that's teaching morals, it's teaching values. We think about feelings, and we're trying to teach emotional regulation. And we think about behavior, and we're trying to teach this acceptable behavior. And when we do those 3 things, we're kind of getting to our ultimate goal as parents, which is to raise good humans who can make good decisions and can control their emotions. And that's really what we're trying to do as parents there.
Sometimes I'm not even looking at raising good humans. I'm just trying to get through the day. Do you know what I mean? Like, you look at the kids some days and you think, I'm absolutely crazy about you. I love you so much, but could you just leave me alone? Because I don't know if I'm going to be a good human if you stay around me. That's what I love so much about this blog. So tell us a bit more about this idea of how we're supposed to raise good humans, because historically, I don't think we've done it particularly well in our culture, in our society.
No, we definitely haven't. I think we've always tried, but I think we've kind of gotten in our own way sometimes. So there was this huge movement from the 1920s, 1940s, where we started to apply these behaviorist principles to parenting. And these were based on research done on dogs and pigeons and other animals like that. And we started to do it to parenting as well. And we said, if we just give them the right reward or inflict the right punishment, we can get them to do whatever we need. And it kind of works. So if we inflict a punishment, it's actually very good at securing this immediate compliance, but it has these unintended long-term consequences. So there's this one researcher called Constance Cami who argued that punishment leads to these 3 possible outcomes in the long term. And I'm just going to quote what she said. So she said that the most common one is a calculation of risks. The child who is punished will repeat the same act, but try to avoid being caught the next time. The second possible outcome of punishment is the opposite of the first one, blind conformity. Some compliant children become perfect conformists because conformity assures them of security and respectability. When they become complete conformists, children do not have to make decisions anymore, as all they have to do is obey. The third possible outcome is revolt. Some children are angels for years, but decide at a certain point that they are tired of pleasing their parents and teachers all the time, and that the time has come for them to begin living for themselves. They may thus even begin to engage in various acts of delinquency.
Yeah, isn't it funny how when there's not an intrinsic desire to do it, that we struggle so much when it comes to our children's motivation and behaviour. Listening to what you're talking about reminds me of that great John Watson quote. So for people who are not familiar with psychology, John B. Watson was one of the fathers of the modern psychology movement. He was responsible for essentially the destruction of the life of a young boy called Little Albert, because he taught him to be afraid of a white rabbit and then eventually everything white. It's just a tragic story. But he has this quote where he says, "Give me a dozen healthy infants, well-formed, and my own specified world to bring them up in, and I'll guarantee to take anyone at random and train him to become any type of specialist I might select. Doctor, lawyer, artist, merchant, and yes, even beggar man and thief, regardless of his talents, penchants, tendencies, abilities, vocations, and race of his ancestors. In other words, Watson's saying this behavioral approach, if I punish and reward the right way, I can make anyone do anything. And that guy literally formed the foundation of the modern psychology movement right through until the 1970s, 80s, even. I mean, his legacy still stands today in too many corners.
Yeah, and we're definitely grateful for him in many ways. Like, I don't think psychology would be what it is without him. But I also don't trust what he says about raising kids at all, in that I think I might be getting it wrong, but I'm pretty sure 3 of his 4 children attempted suicide. So
yeah, so several of them died by suicide, and they had a miserable life. The documented record is tragic around Watson.
And we definitely find that, inflicting these punishments, trying to secure compliance, trying to shape behavior in this way, it's definitely not what we're going for. So when we think about what Constance Cami was saying about those 3 consequences, we can kind of tie it back to those 3 things that we're trying to do with our kids. So she said that the first one was calculation of risk. And when I think of that, I think about, when we're taking away these privileges, when we're taking away all these things, when we're saying that you're going to miss out on dessert or that you're not going to have screen privileges, we're trying to shape their behavior. But it's not really working. We're just shifting the timing of the behavior.
I remember one time my dad said to me, if I ever catch you doing that again, Justin, so help me, there'll be trouble. And I distinctly remember thinking in my head, don't worry, Dad, you won't ever catch me doing that again. I'm going to be so sneaky next time.
Yeah, exactly. It's exactly what happens. We see that all the time. Like, we don't actually see our child drawing on the wall, but, we know they did it. Like, we can see their name on the wall. It's not like they're being, they learn. They get sneakier as they go up, I'm sure.
Right.
So then the second consequence was blind conformity. And when we think about that, we might think that, hey, punishment worked. They're acting the way we want. They're being a good child. They're being obedient. But when that's happening, they're not actually being moral. Like, they're just doing what they're being told instead of doing what they feel is actually right.
There's also a tremendous risk associated with that as well, Beck. When we did parental guidance and had a look at the way parents were, the different parenting styles and what was going on with the kids, we did a stranger in the park with a puppy experiment where somebody literally tried to bribe or encourage children to leave the care of their nanny and follow them as a stranger to see some more puppies. And it was the kids that came from families that really emphasized strictness and compliance, conformity to rules. They were the ones that were most likely to follow the adult, that is the authority figure, even though it was a risky thing to do that and they shouldn't have been doing it. The conformity was so strong. So it has a really frightening side to it as well. It's not just about conformity and a lack of morality, no internalized morality. It can lead to really dangerous consequences.
Yeah, that's so true. And I think, we really emphasize this obedience in the classroom and obedience at home, but we don't think about how that looks outside of the classroom and outside of home.
And what was the third one again?
The third one was revolt. And we definitely, hopefully don't see that too much in our children, but we definitely see that around the world. Like, when there's this continued regime of injustice and control, we see people rising up and pushing back against that. And we do see that in our kids sometimes, when they explode, when they push back, when they become rebellious, when they ignore us, when they intentionally act out. And it's because they haven't had this chance to learn emotional regulation. They've just been pushing down these negative feelings. They've been pushing down, all these negative thoughts. And you can only hold so much in you at one time, and then it just is going to burst out.
So we have centuries of unhelpful patterning. We've got at least 100 years of John Watson's legacy in this area that undermines what we're trying to do, which is to raise good humans, raise moral humans, raise humans that are not going to revolt because they're buying into wise decision-making and living a moral life. Tell me about what you wrote in your blog to help us to move in that direction.
Yep. So again, I linked it back to those 3 areas. So one was fostering acceptable behavior. And I think we really do that by, like you say, exploring, explaining, and empowering. So when we explore why they're acting a certain way and we explain what we would like to see instead, why we feel a certain way about something. And then we empower them to find a solution that works for both of us, that helps them behave acceptably to us, but also something that's acceptable to them. The second thing was with moral development. We actually don't get moral development by, telling them what to do all the time, by bossing them around. It's by allowing mistakes. Like, we're not going to see them learn what it means to be kind if we're always telling them what to do and how to be kind. They learn by behaving unkindly and realizing that didn't feel good, and I don't want to feel that way again. I want to be kind to my brother because I like the way it feels when I choose to be kind. Or they learn to be honest because they steal something and they realize that didn't feel good and they don't want to do that again.
It's so critical here. I listen to what you're saying. It's so critical that they have a wise adult beside them who can engage with them around these ideas. Otherwise, stealing the thing feels really good. It's like, I got this. And if they don't have that opportunity to workshop this and figure it out, then they don't have the same learnings. But when I hear you say allowing them to have the opportunity to make mistakes, this is something that we struggle with so much as parents. We don't want our kids to make the mistakes. And I keep on, I say this in my workshops all the time. If you are going to learn a language, you are going to make a million mistakes before you master that language. If you're going to learn a musical instrument, same again. You actually have to make the mistakes.
We see, like, with learning a language, it's so much easier to learn a language when you're young than when you're old. You're going to make way more mistakes when you're old. But it's the same with learning morals. Like, if we're leaving it to when they're older and they're teenagers or they're young adults and have moved out of home, the mistakes they're going to make are much bigger than the mistakes they're going to make if they're just 2 or 3. So I'd much rather allow those mistakes young.
Yeah, wonderful story, an apocryphal, metaphorical, allegorical kind of story about a master and the apprentice. They're walking through the woods and the master points at a tiny little, it's a baby tree just sort of growing out of the soil. It's only about 5 centimeters tall. And he asks the apprentice to pull it out by its roots. And of course, the young man reaches down and pulls it out. No problem at all. Then they come to a sapling. This one's about 2 meters tall. It's only a thin sapling, but it's already shooting up towards the top of the canopy. And the master says to the young man, I want you to pull this out. And the young man, he grunts and groans for about 5 minutes. I mean, the roots have sunk deep into the soil and it's hard to get this thing out. But eventually, 10 or 15 minutes later, he's able to wrestle it from the soil and he feels like he's really accomplished something other than destruction of the environment. And then the master points to a grand tree. It's hundreds of years old in front of him. It's several meters in diameter. I mean, this is a huge tree. And the master says to the apprentice, now I'd like you to pull that one out. I mean, this one's not going to come out without earth-moving equipment, right? It's going to take a lot of work and probably many, many hours with the right machinery. And of course, the young man says, well, I can't do that. To which the master replies, our habits, our behaviors, our morals, all those things, they're the same. We can deal with them. We can remove the bad ones much easier when they're only young. But the longer that they are allowed to take root in our soul or in our personality or our psyche or whatever, the harder it is to extract them. Anyway, I didn't mean to digress, but I just love that as we're talking about raising good humans, it's up to us to be there. What was the third thing?
So the third thing was building emotional regulation. So I really love the metaphor, I guess, of Dr. Tina Payne Bryson and Dr. Daniel Siegel in their book, The Whole Brain Child. So they talk about the upstairs brain and the downstairs brain and how there's a staircase between them, and that staircase gets blocked when our children become reactive and tantruming. And it's not that they're choosing to behave that way. It's just they literally don't have that access between their logical part of their brain and their reactive emotional part. And they talk about that the way to unblock that staircase is through co-regulation. So we just sit calmly with our children. We are their calm and we're inviting them to join us. And so we might just use some breathing exercises, use physical comfort, use soothing tones, whatever it is that works best with each individual child to help them calm down. And then once they're feeling calmer, once they're collected, that's when it's the time to teach them how to do reparations, how to say sorry and make it better. We can't teach that until they're ready for that.
And so often as parents, we get in and we try to fix everything on the spot when emotions are high and intelligence is low, lids have been flipped, all that kind of thing. Okay, so as we move towards a conclusion, and there's so much more in the article that you've written, we've really sort of skimmed the surface of it. What would be the central take-home message for parents if they want to really hear this conversation and say, oh, that's what I'm trying to do, but my kids just won't listen, or it's like I'm talking to the wall instead of a human. I'm just not getting through. What do you recommend that parents do here?
I think we do our worst parenting when we're focused on our children. So what I mean by that is we sometimes see them acting out. We see them doing these things that we don't like, or they're tantruming, or just feeling overwhelmed with what they're doing. And we worry about it. And we think, well, if they're behaving this way now, how are they going to be tomorrow? How are they going to be next year? How are they going to be 20 years from now? And we focus on their behavior and their feelings to the detriment of thinking about ourselves. We're the best parents we can be when we focus on staying calm ourselves, when we focus on regulating our own emotions, performing acceptable behavior ourselves. And that's, I think, when we're actually good parents. And that's when we're more likely to raise good humans.
I love that line. I think I'm going to have to borrow/steal that line. We are better parents when we're not focusing on our children, but when we're focusing on ourselves. I misquoted that. You said it way better than that, but that really, really stood out to me. Okay, Beck, we need to wrap things up. If people want to find out more about the work that you do, tell us about the Substack and where people can find you.
Yep. So every weekish, I write an article on Substack where I share the things that I'm learning about parenting, where I'm thinking about child development, neuroscience, kind of putting that all together. It's called Lessons Learned, and you can just search Beck Delahoy or Lessons Learned on Substack or just on Google and it should pop up.
And we will link to that in the show notes. The Happy Families podcast is produced by Justin Ruhlon from Bridge Media. So much wisdom, so many great ideas to be found at that Lessons Learned Substack. Please check it out. And we'll be back tomorrow with more on the Happy Families podcast.